You're in the right place if you've come for Fueling the Future, our webinar about nuclear fuel. I'm just going to give it just a few seconds to let people come in. To it should be a good session. And yes, we have an excellent set of panelists lined up for you today. And John, our invisible MC, will be letting people in as they go. So if you have any colleagues who want to join this webinar, please invite them to do so. It will be an hour well worth their time, especially if they're any interested in one of the most exciting parts of the nuclear fuel the nuclear industry as a whole. But people will join, but I'll kick off. So anyways, welcome to Fueling the Future, which is the Nuclear Industry Association's webinar about the opportunity that the UK has in producing nuclear fuel and being part of the processes that go into making fuel that's ready to be loaded into reactors. If you don't know us, we're the civil trade body for the civil nuclear industry here in the UK. We are doing this webinar as part of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. So if you go to greeninfrastructureweek.com, you can see a whole host of events, not just on nuclear, but across the whole energy sector and beyond on this very important subject. But to turn to our subject today, nuclear fuel is the most efficient that we have on Earth by far. One pellet, which it can be the size of your fingertip, can produce enough electricity to power your house for about 6 months. And similarly to that unmatched power and efficiency, the processes that go into making nuclear fuel are similarly high value, highly skilled pieces of work, really impressive feats of science and engineering. I mean, to turn uranium into usable fuel that can be put into reactors, you do have to mine it and mill it. You have to convert it into a form that can be enriched. You have to enrich it, and then you need to take that enriched product and fabricate that into pellets and rods or into other forms, as we will find out later, that can then be used in reactors. We are a net exporter of nuclear fuel services here in the UK. It is one of our strongest sectors comparatively within the nuclear energy industry. And that market for nuclear fuel looks set to surge in demand as countries all over the world look at traditional nuclear, at advanced nuclear, everything in between, for their energy security, for their drive towards net zero. And there's a particular imperative to move away from fuel which is supplied by Russia, who have hitherto been a dominant supplier of nuclear fuel services worldwide. And as I said, the UK, as a net exporter, we have a particular responsibility to help countries move away from their reliance on Russia, which we know what the Russians use it for. So this is a huge opportunity, not only for our country, but for our planet, to drive towards energy security, to drive towards net zero, for us in the UK to win jobs, work, and investment, to help support countries abroad who are looking at the same goals that we are. So I am delighted to welcome the two panelists we have today. Sarah Foreman, who is the head of strategy and corporate development at Urenco, and she'll say a little bit more about who Urenco are. Excellent company, as a little spoiler alert. And then Simon Marshall, who's a strategic advisor to X Energy. Again, excellent company, but he'll say more about the very exciting things that they're doing. They'll each speak for about 10 minutes. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions. There is a function at the top, helpfully labeled Q&A. If you want to ask a question, go to Q&A and stick it in, and then I will do my best to get through as many as we can in the time allotted. We are recording this, so Green Infrastructure Week will make it available on their platforms in case you really want to watch it back. There was something so marvelous that we said that you can't get enough of. You want to clip it, it'll be there ready for you. And just one little cheeky touch I wanted to add. This is going to be one of the few webinars you will be in nuclear, and maybe amongst any webinars, where none of the panelists are in fact from the home counties or southern England at all. So that's a little sweetener, depending on your perspective. Maybe not if you're from Berkshire, but anyways, I will hand over to Sarah, actually, who's just disappeared. But Sarah, in the first instance, you're the first panelist. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And indeed, I'll speak without a home country accent. You'll hear the American within me. My name is Sarah Foreman. Exactly as Lincoln said, I lead global strategy and corporate development at Urenco. And what I'd love to do in the next few minutes is introduce Urenco, talk about some of our plans to expand enrichment capacity to meet market needs and address some of the questions and challenges that Lincoln hinted at. Give some broader perspective on the enrichment market and how we're seeing that evolve and change, especially over the last 18 months. and then focus on really an update around advanced fuels, strategic autonomy, and what we see as some real opportunities for the UK's domestic fuel capabilities. So to start, what is Urenco? Well, we're the uranium enrichment company, and broadly we do what it says on the tin. We're a leading enrichment company for civil nuclear fuel. We have operations in the Netherlands, in Germany, the UK, and the USA, and we focus on providing safe, cost-effective, and reliable uranium enrichment services and fuel cycle products for power generation to over 50 customers in 19 countries, so all centered on civil use for electricity generation. We're one of only 4 suppliers that provide uranium enrichment services globally, and that means that especially right now, the world is really looking to us to support quite a growing and changing nuclear energy industry. And what we've been doing, fortunately, over the past 18 months at all of our sites is immediately increasing our capacity in order to meet growing market demand. We do that through what we talk about as reversing underfeeding, which is essentially a way of saying that we've changed the way we optimize how we use our assets to let us generate more separative work, more focus on the particular fissile isotopes we need for enrichment from the exact same machines. In the future, we can change that again, and we can re-optimize in order to make up for, say, a lack of conversion capacity in the fuel cycle, which I might talk about later, and really have quite innate flexibility in how we use our assets to be responsive to changing customer and societal needs. We've also embarked on quite a significant capital investment program that will let us increase longer-term enrichment capacity across all of our sites. That means we've begun engineering, design, and other foundational work to let us deliver whatever the market needs of us in the future. We've also made some new contracts with our centrifuge supplier with ETC, the enrichment technology company, in order to ensure a robust supply chain of all the critical components that will make that happen. We've recently announced the first of our capacity expansions. That's going to happen at our US site, adding an incremental 15% extra capacity to that site. So that's 700 tons of additional separative work every year, and we anticipate that coming online by early 2027. We also have the physical space and the headroom in our licenses to be able to expand all of our other sites as well. So as an example, our Dutch site could go from the 5.1 million SWU it was this year up to 6.2 million SWU or separative work a year. We're actively looking at proposals to expand our UK facility in Capenhurst, just outside of Chester. So those again are also options. So that's, in a nutshell, Urenco, what we're doing and ways in which we're growing and evolving to be responsive to the changing market needs we see. To dive a little bit more into what those are, if I think about the overall enrichment market, we're seeing that there are 3 big drivers that are giving the nuclear industry, and then specifically our component of it, new and increased momentum. The first is the climate crisis. The second is the need for energy security, largely as a result of the Ukraine conflict. And the third is the really quite rapid advancement of new technology, such as small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. So I'll talk through each of these in turn and then use the last one to be a bit more expensive. On the climate crisis, what we're seeing is that more and more countries are turning to nuclear because, exactly as Lincoln said, they recognize it as a reliable, low carbon, and secure source of energy, and that the need for that is only becoming more acute and more urgent. The way that's manifesting is that many countries are extending the lifetime of plants that have been slated to close. Others are expanding plans to build new power plants, and others are investing even more in the new reactor technologies that we expect to be really shaping the energy landscape in the future. All of those things have accelerated quite a bit in the past couple of years and are things that we see becoming even more important as the recognition of the need to decarbonize our broader energy systems becomes more clear. So that's the climate crisis. The second is energy security. And essentially, this is one that has become more and more part of the forefront of the conversation since Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. There's a reawakening to the importance of having really secure, reliable, and sustainable sources of all elements of the fuel cycle in order to ensure that stability. And that's leading to a renewed emphasis on security of fuel supplies and into longer-term contracting with counterparties that are seen as reliable and sustainable. And we know that up until recently, Russian state-owned enterprises have been active in many markets and offering prices that frankly are unsustainable in a Western context. What's shifting now is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is encouraging customers to consider their supplies and where they're coming from. And we're seeing that despite that price structuring, customers and countries are actively diversifying away from Russian supplies. So as an example, we have an ongoing contract with Urenco, that's the Ukrainian nuclear power operator, and we've increased our volumes to them within our existing contract in light of the conflict. Similarly, we've signed a 10-year deal with Bulgaria's Kozloduy plant to supply one of their units that was originally fully Russian fueled, and we're working with our partners Cameco and Westinghouse to make that happen. Actually, together with Westinghouse, we can now offer operators across Eastern Europe the fuel they require for Russian-designed reactors that previously they couldn't move away from. So I think in general, we're ready to support countries seeking to increase their energy security and independence. And again, we see this trend really continuing, that focus on energy security and reliability is going to mean that there's more and more focus on suppliers like ourselves, and we think our commitments to customers will only grow there. The third big trend, and I think focus for some of this conversation, is the quite rapid advancement of new technology, and often technologies that require advanced fuels. And as was already alluded to, we're seeing that the next generation of nuclear reactors is advancing quite quickly, and we know that it's going to have different characteristics than those that have come before. So typically, I expect that they'll be smaller than traditional light water reactors, often capable of operating at higher temperatures, and that these advanced modular reactors in different forms will make a very large contribution to overall energy use as governments and companies look to use them to decarbonize certainly electricity systems, but also the broader ways in which we power what we do day to day. Often these new designs will require advanced nuclear fuels, including LEU+, as we call it, so that's enriched uranium up to about 10% U-235, and high assay, low enriched uranium, or HALEU, that's enriched to just under 20% U-235. Today, Russia is the only country that can currently commercially supply high assay, low enriched uranium. And Urenco is actively supporting the evolution of the nuclear fuel cycle to change that and to supply this next generation of fuel to support future reactors. Indeed, we have the first customer contract for EUP that's going to be used in an advanced reactor that was signed with the Ultrasafe Nuclear Corporation, and we're committed to a first delivery in 2025. We've also recently been awarded about $9.5 million in match funding from the UK government's Nuclear Fuel Fund to help develop LEU+, so up to 10%, and high assay LEU, up to 20% enrichment capabilities at our Capenhurst site, again, the same one near Chester in the north of England. That's going to be used to develop capabilities to produce and handle higher enriched uranium products in the UK supply chain. That includes the delivery of optioneering, requirements definition, site layout, initial safety case, early security works, and concept design. So lots of the fundamentals to make this possible in the UK context. And we think that both our investment and the investment from the UK government represents quite a significant economic opportunity for the UK. So the ability to develop the infrastructure, the skills and capability to both produce and export HALEU can deliver really vast economic and industrial benefits because of that domestic supply and then certainly the exports across the globe. And to be clear, it's not just the export of the HALEU products themselves, but also potentially the export of skills and capabilities needed to handle, to transport, to manufacture, deliver the safety case for HALEU, and all of the other skills that are associated with these homegrown HALEU capabilities. So see quite a lot of opportunity there, but to seize them, there are certainly challenges that need to be overcome, including technical questions, economic ones, and planning challenges associated with building that full supply chain. Right now, we're actively addressing these in conjunction with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, with the NIA, and with other industry stakeholders. And we think that targeted cooperation between the UK government and the civil nuclear sector to address these challenges, it's very important, it's necessary, and it will ultimately strengthen the UK nuclear fuel supply chain to support the overall energy transition and broader energy security needs. We're also seeing that international collaboration will be key in this space in particular, as global dependence of this industry on Russian sources of uranium creates a risk for global energy security ambitions. And we've therefore welcomed a few recent developments that are really helping with that collaboration and making it possible. One of these is the Atlantic Declaration that was signed between the UK and the US in June That'll encourage the building of new infrastructure and bolster fuel cycle capacity in 2030 in both countries, in the US and UK. And similarly, the Civil and Nuclear Fuel Security Agreement between the 5 nuclear leaders in the G7 that was announced in April, associated with the G7 meeting on climate, energy, and environment in Japan. That establishes further cooperation between Canada, France, Japan, the UK, and the US, all focused on reducing Russia's influence in the global nuclear fuel supply chain. So this is a really excellent close collaboration, and what's established by these agreements with our international partners should help us to develop a more secure and shared nuclear fuel supply that meets overall market requirements in this very interconnected and global industry. So those are just a few thoughts on the emergence of advanced fuels, the need for them, and to support the next generation of reactors. To close, I think I just conclude that we know that nuclear as an industry has a real opportunity, but it needs to deliver on the growing momentum for new nuclear. There's quite a long way to go, and we're in the midst of working with our customers, with partners in the industry, with the UK government and other national governments to support these energy sustainability and security efforts. But for the industry to deliver, there's going to need to be real investment in the fuel supply chain. It's essential. And we'll need, as one of those players, we'll need to invest to ensure there's capacity for the future. Urenco's doing so. We're expanding capacity at our sites, and we're investing in the fuel capabilities for the future. But for investments like ours to be fully successful, and those of our industry partners to be successful, we also know that we'll need sustainable long-term customer contracts that underpin these expansions and long-term policies that give clarity on future market dynamics and access. Indeed, that stable government policy around the role of nuclear in the energy mix, it'll help us plan for the next 10 to 15 years as we build assets that will last for decades. This is especially important as there are elections in the UK, in the US, and the EU all coming up in the next 12 to 18 months. So really key nuclear markets. And so that long-term certainty from a market access and a policy perspective, that will be really critical. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sarah. And there's plenty of food for thought and food for questions in what you've just said. Again, the Q&A function's right at the top. So while you're listening to Simon and digesting what Sarah said, you can pop questions in there. But before we come back to that, Simon, over to you. And I think John will also share the couple slides that you have for our entertainment and information today.
Thank you, Lincoln, and thanks for the opportunity. Just as background, I've had the pleasure of 43 years, I think it is now, in the nuclear industry in the UK and overseas. My background was BNFL. Started my career in fuel manufacture, Springfield, Sellafield. I was fortunate enough to be seconded to the Pebble Bed project in South Africa, which whetted my appetite on high temperature gas cool reactors. Latterly moved into new build and now semi-retired, but providing strategic advice to X-Energy. So if you want to go to the next slide, John, please. So there are around 70 SMRs and AMRs under development today. For the typical reactor vendors who have SMRs, Westinghouse, Framatome, GE, clearly they have their own fuel supply. The vast majority of other AMR, SMR suppliers do not. And that's why X-Energy is somewhat unique in that it is both an AMR reactor supplier and a fuel manufacturer. The company was founded in 2009, and we now have around 550 employees, primarily in the US, but with a very proud team of 5 and building here in the UK. I guess fundamental is an award by the US DOE to X-Energy as 50% match funding for a first project. That project is now being announced at Dow Chemicals at the Seadrift site in Texas. So a total of $2.4 billion, which provides 4 80-megawatt reactors plus a commercial scale fuel plant. The fuel plant is scheduled to be online 26-27, with the first reactor online in Texas in 29. And our aspiration, if we can align ourselves with the UK government, would be to have the 5th unit and the first unit in the UK online by 2030. Next slide, please. So in terms of the technology, a high temperature gas cool reactors use TRISO fuel. The XE100 reactor uses TRISO fuel in pebble form. Here's one I prepared earlier, a solid chunk of graphite. This one doesn't have uranium in, but the active pebbles comprise around 19,000 coated particles. In the center of that particle, you can see on step 1 on the left is a uranium oxycarbide kernel that's enriched to 15.5% U235. It's uranium oxycarbide because that builds on a lot of historic experience that demonstrates that oxycarbide, as opposed to UO2, allows significantly higher burn-ups. And this fuel, we plan to take it to 168 gigawatt days per ton. Compare that with current PWR fuel around the 50 to 60, so a factor of 3 higher burn-up. That uranium kernel, which is about 425 micron, is then coated with a number of layers. The first layer, which is that sort of strange turquoise color, is a porous graphite. Its purpose is to absorb any fission gases that get released, not dissimilar to the plenum in a PWR fuel rod. The next layer in blue is a pyrocarbon, a hard carbon layer, and that then provides the substrate where we deposit a silicon carbide layer in white. It's that silicon carbide layer that acts as the primary pressure vessel that holds in and acts as the containment to contain the fission products. And a final silicon pyrocarbon layer that then protects the particle when it is then fabricated into the pebble itself. If you want to move to the next slide, please, John. So on the left-hand side, we then load around 220,000 of those pebbles into a tall, slim cylinder. It's tall and slim because by that design, in the worst case accident, the reactor actually cools itself and we don't need any external heat removal systems. The pebbles flow through the reactor. They take about 6 months to move from top to bottom, so not unlike a gumball machine or a bubble gum machine where you turn the handle at the bottom and out comes the bubble gum. You then test it for burn up. If it's spent, it goes into a spent fuel canister. If it's not, it simply goes back into the top of the reactor. Typically 6 passes at 6 months each, so a total residence time of about 3 years in the reactor. The fuel is helium cooled. That goes through a steam generator and generates steam at 16 megapascals, 565 degrees centigrade. So the technology can produce either 80 megawatts electric or 200 megawatts of high temperature, high quality steam. And the first project for Dow Chemicals, the 4-pack of these reactors, which is the commercial unit in which they are built and sold, will generate both electricity for the Dow Chemicals site and its process heat requirements, and any spare capacity will be sold off into the grid. The advantage of the 4-pack concept is learning. As you build more of them, you learn and the costs will decrease, but it also allows you redundancy for process chemical plants that require very high availability of steam supply. The plant is modular, mostly constructed off-site and then shipped onto site for final assembly. Significantly less concrete than legacy plants and very few safety systems, because we rely on the intrinsic physics of the uranium-235 that as the temperature increases, the reactivity decreases, and the tall, slim cylinder then allows the heat to naturally leave the core and keep the fuel cool. So I'll pause at that point, Lincoln, and hand back to yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for that, Simon. And what I'll start off with, there's with a question for you. And as I say, there's the Q&A function. Add your questions in. I know we already have one for Sarah, which I will just come back to. But Simon, can you describe? You talk about higher temperature heat. Can you describe a little bit about what that means for the opportunity for the UK, particularly in industrial decarbonisation?
Yes, so everybody talks about decarbonising electricity, but if we look at the UK, our design point for electricity is around 50 gigawatts. But if we look at domestic and commercial heating, it's around 200 gigawatts. So there's a significant opportunity if you then add on top of that transport, the move to electric vehicles. So there's a significant electrical challenge anyway, but then there's the heat challenge. And being able to get up to 565, we can probably, with a couple of exceptions, one being glass, but we can probably deal with 80% of the industrial need for process heat at these temperatures.
That's significant, as you say, because I think at the moment about 80% of the UK's energy use is non-electrical and dominated by heat applications. That's a big opportunity. But there is a question for you, Sarah, which gets to the heart of the matter. That Urenco has a good record on delivering on enrichment capacity. Are you confident on either side of you that we'll have the capacity to match it in uranium conversion and then in fuel fabrication on the other side?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd echo what's said. I think we commit to what we do on the enrichment side, so we're very confident we can build that as what's needed. We would say that conversion, in our view, is a bottleneck where further investment is going to be needed as the industry expands. So it's interesting. For enrichment, once those assets are operational, they're not appropriate for mothballing. They'll just keep running and they'll keep going into perpetuity. Conversion is a little bit different, and so we've seen that can go up and down as a market. And right now, there's a real need for conversion in the near term in order to be able to support that reversal of underfeeding that I mentioned. So the way that assets are used in order to generate more separative work in the moment. And that may, depending on how the market evolves, that may continue. So a continued investment in conversion will be really critical to providing the ongoing flexibility for the industry. There's obviously been some really excellent movement in this space as governments and industry partners are reinvesting in plans and building further capacity. We certainly welcome that, but it's one that we would see needing continuous monitoring and focus to make sure that there continues to be enough of that conversion capacity.
Sure.
Thanks.
Can I just, on that one, just to sort of follow up with you, could you put in terms of millions of pounds, billions of pounds, what the market opportunity is for the UK in, I guess, traditional uranium conversion, enrichment, fabrication? Basically, what do the Russians do today that they sell to the West? How much is that we could be a part of replacing?
It's a good question. So right now, I'm going to need to translate it into financial terms as we speak. But if we look at before February of 2022, Russia was exporting about 8 to 10 million SWUs, separative work units, around the world in enrichment services, including to Europe, the US, to markets that would traditionally think of as Western facing. A lot of that already is a market that is looking to increase security of supply and is diversifying away. So we've seen a real change in contracting activity for much of that market sense. But we do think there's space to move further so that as countries continue to focus on energy security, we'd see more of that 8 to 10 million SWU, especially in those Western-facing markets, needed alternative supplies. Certainly the UK is one of the places where that could be produced. And so I think that gives a bit of a basis for it. And I'm using enrichment as the starting point there. But I think if we think about how Russia has historically used at state-owned enterprises to export fuel. They package together often enriched uranium product that combines conversion, fabrication, enrichment, as you've mentioned. So I would think that rough scale just gives a sense of the scale, the size of the opportunity. And so it's a financial question, as you've raised, but I think it's also really one that's broader than that, around strategic autonomy and security of supply that lets countries have the resilience in their energy systems that they need. And so it's actually more than just the dollars and pounds there. It's also that inbuilt stability that I think is quite important.
Sure. And then I'll just ask one more for you, and then we'll switch to one for Simon on advanced fuels. You spoke a lot about the importance of sustainable contracts, long-term contracts to underwrite these capital investments. What policy changes do you need, or how could the policy environment support getting that those long-term contracts that you need to make these big and, as you said, strategically critical investments?
Yeah, so I think one of the big questions is certainty around future market access for state-owned enterprises and Russian supply in the future. So understanding for utilities, for ourselves, what that will look like in the future, and having that consistency and certainty would help give the market clarity needed for a lot of the investments we just spoke about. So I think that clarity around market access, and then also clarity around the investment, frankly, in nuclear and the commitment to this as an industry that will help with the really crucial decarbonization of, I completely agree with the points that just been made, not just decarbonization of our electricity systems, but our overall energy systems. And so I think those would be two of the big flavors, that real certainty on how this market will evolve and clarity there.
Sure. Simon, can I just ask, you spoke about pebble bed designs and X-Energy being a high temperature gas cooled designs. I mean, some of those in the audience might know, but can you speak a little bit about the UK's unique role in doing some of the research and development work on this over the last few decades, and how that positions us competitively in advanced reactor deployment going forward?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I do smile with the term advanced, given it was probably the UKAEA pre-71 that played around with all of these fuels back in the 50s and 60s, but it was the PWR technology that sort of won and hence became, at the time, the global standard. So the UK has actually a guy called Roy Huddle at Harwell had the original patent for triso fuel back in 1957. So it's been around as long as I have, unfortunately. We've made uranium fuels, carbide fuels through the UKAEA, then through into BNFL, which was formed in 81. Unfortunately, then I guess around the 90s, the UK reduced its funding in R&T quite significantly. But then, in the late 2000s and in the 10s, I guess the UK realised we needed to get back in the saddle. Interestingly, at a similar time as we were reducing our funding, the US was putting a few $100 million into the next generation nuclear program and the development of triso fuel that X-Energy is now seeing the benefit from. But the UK has this rich history at Springfields, at Sellafield, at Harwell. Clearly, there won't be much at Harwell and Sellafield going forward. But I think there is a real opportunity because of that 70-year experience. We have the license sites. We understand the basics of the quality assurance and the quality control. And in the UK, we have cross-party support for new nuclear. We stumbled a bit in 2005 when we said it was for the private sector, but those were for large reactors at say 20 billion. Now for small reactors and advanced reactors at 2 billion, with a robust fuel route, you're then within the reach of private sector investment, I think. So I think the UK is looking very positive for advanced reactor deployment going forward.
Sure. And how one of the big features of the net zero transition is the just transition, or making use of the expertise and the jobs that already exist. Simon, how do you see that for, the UK has thousands of people with experience in working on gas-cooled reactors. What opportunity do you see for them in the deployment of technologies like X-energy and other reactors of that type?
Yeah. So there are a number of high temperature gas reactors coming to the marketplace. There aren't many large ones, so it's unlikely that the smaller vendors can justify their own fuel facilities. So from a fuel perspective, the Nuclear Fuel Fund has awarded Westinghouse some money to look at the concept of a flexible fuel facility, which initially based on TRISO, but then has opportunities to make other LEU plus and HALEU fuels for other advanced manufacturing reactor technologies. I think the benefit parochially for X-energy, and we're very keen on looking at the Hartlepool site, which has land in the MPS, as an advanced gas cool reactor with immense knowledge and understanding of gas graphite reactor operation, maintenance, etc. That will be coming to a close sometime later this decade, and a real opportunity, I think, to take those skills and make sure we don't lose them and be able to transition them to new technology.
No, that's a very good point, and I think we might actually return to that one. Could I ask actually both of you, Simon, but actually I may go to you, Sarah, first, is what signal about either a demand signal or support would you want to see from the UK government or more broadly to make HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, make HALEU a viable proposition in the UK? And Simon, from your perspective, the same thing. What kind of demand signal we're looking for from government or policy signals that's enough to make the UK a good place to have an advanced fuel fabrication facility? I'll go to you first, Sarah.
So in many ways, we're already working very closely with the UK government and with customers on this. So we're currently preparing for that capability. So figuring out how to expand our product portfolio, first for LEU plus and then for HALEU within the UK. I think typically decisions like ours are tied to that long-term customer contracting to underpin investments. And so if I think about that market evolution that's needed to be able to back up any investment, it's again that policy certainty that helps reactor developers like X-energy and others to thrive, and that certainty of what that market demand will look like. And so if I just really thinking through those policies, that's real commitment around the need for nuclear as part of the energy mix. And again, I think it's a really important point. It's not just about power, but it's decarbonizing of process heat, it's decarbonizing of other elements of energy use, and the support to make sure that industry is able to be successful. That includes dealing with questions around how we ensure reactors can exist within the UK. So licensing questions and all the other market technical questions that need to be evolved. So I think that's a big part of it. It's really supporting that market development and making sure the customers that we'll eventually sell to are able to succeed and be set up. Be some of my starting points. I'm curious for Simon's perspective on that one too.
Sure. Simon.
Yeah, so there are policy positives. So the UK has selected HTGR as its AMR of choice for first deployment. If we look at decarbonisation, the location of Hartlepool next to Teesside is an ideal first opportunity to test that out. But what we need now is a strategy to allow us to execute. Disappointed that the GBN supplier qualification has an initial focus on water-based reactors. It would appear the government's hypothesis is larger reactors are here today, water-based small modular reactors will be here tomorrow, and advanced modular reactors, including high-temperature gas reactors, are the day after tomorrow. I would respectfully disagree on the basis we have a project. We are working on the ground in Texas to begin to deliver that project. So I think HTGRs can come at least in parallel with some of the SMRs. I do hear people talk about, well, because these are cheaper, let's say a couple of billion, if government just got out of the way and let industry get on with it and let the commercial market take over. Unfortunately, that's not realistic. You do need government backing. These are NPS sites. We need liabilities fund. So there are various reasons why it's not possible to go it alone. But we would hope that we can persuade the government that the Hartlepool site will be a great first site for a dozen 80 megawatt HTGRs as the first of a fleet of at least 40. That fleet of 40 would demand on an annual basis around 20 tons of HALEU. And I think with those sorts of signals, Sarah might then be able to say, yeah, that's a sufficient demand to start to put a HALEU facility in place.
Sure. Well, I won't ask Sarah to quote that exact number. As tempted as I was, Sarah, to say, okay, Simon says he's going to give you 40 reactors. Is that enough for you? But we had GBN give us an ambition for 24 gigawatts of power, basically for on-grid baseload electricity, the traditional use of nuclear. I will ask you guys a yes or no question, which you should feel free to duck and answer with a non-yes or no answer. But would you like to see a similar target or demand signal set for advanced reactor application or for the non-grid or non-baseload electricity applications of nuclear power? Simon, to you first, and then Sarah, I'll go to you.
Yes, absolutely, because it's those sort of signals that give investor confidence that brings in the external financing that will be required to deliver this.
Sure. Sarah, over to you.
I'd build on one of the points that was made earlier that only about 20% of the energy we use comes in the form of electricity. And so if we're serious about decarbonizing our overall energy systems that we use, if we're really committed to net zero, we've got to deal with the 80%. And that comes from everything else. And so we can quibble about the numbers, but I think really committing to finding innovative ways to decarbonize all other elements of our industry, our manufacturing capabilities, all of that is critical to long-term stability, what I care about for my children and their children. And so I think that's really, it's an important market signal, but I think also part of actually achieving our net zero goals as a country. Yeah. So the commitment beyond just power, I think, is quite important.
Sure. And on that, about the commitment beyond power, another, I guess, question for you. Simon, X Energy has a customer in the US for, as you said, for heat as well as for the electricity coming out of these reactors. Sarah mentioned that Urenco, one of the first places Urenco is expanding enrichment capacity is at the facility in the US. What can we learn from the way the US has done things in these couple of areas? Maybe they've got their nose ahead of us in terms of advanced reactor deployment. What can we learn to this endeavor now to expand our fuel cycle capabilities to realize the potential of advanced reactors as we go forward this decade? Sarah, I'll go to you first, actually, and then Simon. You'll have a bit more time to ponder.
What can we learn from the US? So I think you're absolutely right that there's been a lot of development in this market very quickly in the US. I think there are a lot of different factors at play there. So certainly there's been a different approach to government support, and I think X Energy can likely speak to some of this encouragement that's been given to development of advanced reactors there. I think there's questions on whether and how that might apply within the UK. Then that similar level of investment could be relevant here. I think the other thing I'm thinking too is also just, again, the focus on supporting the overall industry to drive market signals and to give the confidence needed to develop. Again, I think that's been an important part of the free market dynamics that are helping to support energy development within the US and the other things that I would expect that big organizations like ours need in order to, again, see the customer demand and the certainty that will help support growth into the future. So just a couple of comments there.
Sure. Simon.
Clearly, the US seem to be able to put more money in. So, they're putting significant funding into their equivalent of net zero. Awarded TerraPower and X Energy $1.2 billion each of 50% funding to get the first two technologies. So whilst they're not picking winners, they seem to be pretty good at down selecting and moving. And I think that's a message that I don't think we've quite yet understood is if we don't move quickly, others are doing, and therefore will we miss the boat? That's my biggest nervousness.
And what you sort of missing the boat? So a big risk. What do you think that British industry? We want customers for non-electricity applications. And I'll go to you first, Simon, and Sarah, a few comments. What does British industry need to know about the potential of advanced nuclear? You think that they don't know yet?
So I think we are in dialogue with a number of companies, and I can't go into any details for commercial reasons, but it is clear that there's a surprise at the capability of the technology. And it's just, I guess, an unconsciousness that actually that technology exists and can help. And once we've explained that, we seem to be getting some traction. And certainly that's what worked in the US. There are significant opportunities for further development in the US in terms of the XE100 technology. The challenge is always the first one. Easy to sell the second, selling the first is the challenge. And that's why we are in deep dialogue now with a number of companies just to look at how our technology can assist them in their decarbonisation, not in terms of electricity, but in terms of primarily process heat.
So do you have anything else to add on that about what industry outside needs to know about nuclear, particularly advanced nuclear, that they don't know yet?
I think it's a really important point that Simon's raised, that sometimes the understanding of how these tools can actually operate and what they can do, it just needs to advance. There's also not necessarily the technical capabilities, but also the licensing and regulatory environment. This is possible, that we can set up systems so that you don't need to be a utility in order to benefit from the energy, the heat, the power that comes out of an advanced nuclear reactor. And some of that may need to actually evolve to be fully true and to make it possible to put a mini reactor everywhere it needs to be. But I think that real understanding of how is one that it needs to advance over time to really fully realize that potential.
Sure. And Sarah, then this is probably maybe not something that you're authorized to say, but do you see a future in which we have advanced reactors, maybe Simon's XE100 at Capenhurst, helping to power operations of Urenco down there?
Who knows? I don't know if I would give the direct answer on this one. I'll take your license to go back and forth. But I think, as with any organization, right, we should, all of us that are running any sort of power hungry or energy hungry system should be thinking really creatively about what kind of systems we use to ensure we have clean, carbon neutral, and also really secure and certain energy systems. And I'm obviously quite bullish on nuclear. I see a lot of opportunity there. So
Sure.
I think we.
This one I'll go to you first, Sarah, and then to Simon. Talk about expanding facilities and introducing innovative technologies. What is the most important thing you think could be changed about the UK system of planning or licensing in order to expedite these expansions and to seize the opportunities in a timely fashion?
Significant things for planning and licensing. I don't know if I have a specific one that I'd raise right now, but I think the overall understanding of the need to do this in a really effective and efficient way is quite important. That might take more investment, and I know that governments are already investing in staffing up and ensuring we have people to manage that. But I think a real, which again, it largely is already happening, a real partnership-based approach that focuses on getting to the shared outcomes that we all need. I think, at least from our perspective in building and enrichment facilities and everything else, I think we get into more interesting questions perhaps on how we can manage the development of nuclear reactor sites. And I think as we think about the spaces those will take up, who's running those, that might require an evolved policy perspective, but I'm sure Simon can speak more to that from the X-energy perspective.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to cut him off and be a little more specific with him, try and pin him to the wall on something. But you talk about working in partnership, and maybe in a slightly different context for this, is that you guys will naturally be going through the reactor assessment and licensing process in the United States, Simon. You'll be, looking at the UK market, and I presume markets, worldwide. What needs to be done in terms of international regulatory collaboration to cut down on the pre-construction phase of nuclear development?
That's a great question. So let me just come back to your first question and cheekily answer that one.
Sure.
What do we need to do in terms of licensing and planning in the UK? I think in terms of planning, we look forward to the national policy statement. Hopefully that will be more criteria based than identifying sites. One advantage of the XE100 is the emergency planning zone will be coincident with the site boundary. Hence, the opportunity to move it closer to areas of industry. And there are 6 or 7 major industrial clusters in the UK that we would look to be able to locate close to. I think the DCO process, as we've seen with the large reactors, is challenging. And I know there is work underway to look at how we streamline that. To answer the licensing process, having led the Westinghouse GDA through to its interim design acceptance, and having learnt the differences between the US and the UK, I smile when I hear people say we need to streamline the licensing process. At the end of the day, you need a robust license that's defendable. So you don't really want any shortcuts. I think what I now see, certainly in real time, on the fuel perspective, both the Canadian regulator and the US NRC have recently issued a review of the TRISO fuel qualification program that EPRI pulled together on behalf of the various vendors in the US. And they've reviewed that jointly and taken a joint position on it. So when we come to the UK, one of the first things I'll be doing is putting it in a nice brown envelope and sending it to Bootle and saying, I hope you read this before we meet you. Because hopefully, if we've got the Canadians and the US on board with the concepts, hopefully after some explanation, the UK can accept it.
Sure. No, that's a very good point, and one I think which will be a continuing theme for you and for other vendors and across the piece. Sarah, I'll ask you one question about traditional, light enriched uranium before I ask you guys, just before we close, to give maybe a minute of closing thoughts. A lot of the customers that you're trying to move to get the long-term certainty to underwrite these big capital investments in new capacity are either partially or fully state-owned utilities or utilities that have a very close relationship to their national governments. Given that reality, what can the UK government do with you and in partnership with Urenco to help convince those utilities, but also those countries, those governments de facto, to move from Russian contracts as well?
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to that international collaboration that we've also already spoken about a little bit. So things like the Sapporo Agreement earlier this year, where big nuclear countries are making a joint commitment to focusing on security of supply and energy stability. I think those kinds of policy collaborations where countries are thinking together about how they work to build a global supply chain, work to support a great global industry, and focus on shared goals around strategic autonomy and stability. I think those are a really promising start that helps give, again, for us, it's market certainty, but I think also really helps to support and protect the energy systems in those countries. So those types of collaborations we see as incredibly positive and a really good foundation for what's needed in the future.
Sure. Well, thank you for that, Sarah. And I will. I'll go to you. I'll go to Simon because he's got a little more time to think about his closing comments. But Simon, maybe if you just in a minute or so, what your closing reflections are on the opportunity for the UK and advanced reactors and advanced fuel what we need to do to seize it, and then on across the piece on fuel, Sarah, the same will go to you. But Simon first.
Yeah, so I mean, the positive is the government has already identified HTGR as its advanced technology of choice. XE100 is in detailed design. Will commence construction in the US in 26. First unit due to be operational before 2030. So we can bring that technology to the UK, and we can bring a fuel facility and a qualified fuel process with it. If we can get the demand signal from the government, it will be the start of a fleet of at least 40, 80 megawatt units and an associated commercial fuel plant. I hear the term sovereign bandied around a lot by some of the vendors. The real value is in the execution and in the high skilled, highly paid jobs that will come for a 60-year duration of each reactor. And that to me is where the value is, not necessarily in the IP, but actually in the execution and in getting, the existing fleets to transition those skill sets, and then bringing youngsters in and developing the skills, because there's too many people of my age still around, and we had quite a gap for about 20 years, and we need to fill that gap pretty quickly.
Sure. All right, thank you, Simon. Yes, as I think there are some people commenting in the chat who are looking to get into the industry. And I say, if anyone is at university, at school, early career, looking to get into nuclear, please do. We need all the good people we can get. And speaking of good people and who studied nuclear at university, Sarah, your kind of closing thoughts.
For sure. So I'd echo a lot of what Simon said. There's a real moment here and a real opportunity for the UK's nuclear industry, its governments, to come together and really deliver on the increased momentum for nuclear that will let us achieve the net zero goals we have to achieve, and that will let us do so in a secure, stable, and just way, which I think is a really important point you made, Lincoln. To do that, we need to deliver. And that it comes down to making sure we have the right people, right resources in the right places. It's the right policy alignments, and it's the right longer term commitments that will let us make the big investments in physical capital and human capital needed for us all to progress. I think there's a huge opportunity here, certainly for, maybe most importantly, to be able to make sure we can achieve those big social goals and what's going to be helpful for the next generation and the generation after that to have a safe place to live, but also to be able to provide the economic benefits, the social benefits that will come from really rebuilding and growing this industry. So tons of opportunity, just need to make sure everything comes together to support that overall delivery.
Sure. Well, thank you, Sarah. That's a good call to arms. That it's an industry that needs to deliver, because it is it's historic opportunity, and we've been through, I think Simon will attest, many nuclear renaissances over the last few years, but I think the moment there are different conjunction of factors that make this one perhaps the most auspicious in recent memory. But that brings us to the end of our webinar today. I would thank you all for joining us at this Fueling the Future webinar, which we've done as part of Energy Security and Green Infrastructure Week. As I said, we've been recording it, so there will be one available afterwards. Apologies to those of you whose questions we didn't get to, but if you ask us at the NIA, if you want to talk further to Simon or to Sarah, get in touch with us. We can pass on your questions or their contact details if they're willing, so you can get satisfy your curiosity in more depth, because it is a fascinating area with so much opportunity for the UK. So I hope you've got something out of it and seen that we are in a position to seize a massive opportunity for our energy security, for our prosperity, for our drive towards net zero, and that we have some exciting technologies before us if we're ready to grasp the nettle and get on with some good delivery. But thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and don't forget to look at more of the Green Infrastructure Week events that are going on throughout the week. But anyways, thank you very much.